people enjoy argument, some do not. But controversy is part of our lives, particularly academic life. This series of films examines controversial issues, but the first two films are relatively uncontroversial. They're about how to deal with controversy, so this will help us in approaching the other films. In these first two films, we'll think about 10 key things to look out for, either in putting forward our own case or in examining that of others. Some people attack the person rather than the idea. Someone's arguing for a national health service free at the point of use and says, "These right-wing politicians don't care about the NHS. They're rich enough to have private medical care." Now, the mistake is obvious. The political view of a person is irrelevant when comparing the costs and benefits of providing a state health service. But is it such an easy mistake to avoid? You may have heard of the halo effect, where people rate a person's characteristics and arguments according to how much they like the first impression. Isn't it easier to accept the argument of the lecturers that you like? We need to listen to the argument, whoever the person is. They're not right because they're nice, or wrong because they're horrible. When it's argued that millions of people smoke, so the claims to damaged health must therefore be exaggerated, this is an appeal that if large numbers of people support a viewpoint, then it must be right. But clearly it isn't. This kind of appeal to the masses is called ad populum. But not falling for this kind of argument is harder than you might think. Most of us want to be in step with others, or at least in with the group with which we identify. Advertisers often claim that everyone's buying their product, with the implication that the product must therefore be good. Now, firms won't spend money making such claims unless the advertising is likely to be successful. People can be fooled by an implied argument that the product must be good because many others think it is. Politicians will tell you that they receive huge numbers of letters in support of their particular views. But the number of letters doesn't make the view correct. Don't be fooled by politicians or advertisers, or indeed anyone else who uses this kind of appeal in an argument. Some statements are normative statements, others are positive. Normative statements are those requiring a value judgment. What ought to be done? What should happen? The minimum wage should be higher. Firms ought to do more to protect the environment. No matter what information is examined, it need not change your view for or against it if it's a normative statement.
Positive statements are those free of value judgments. If the minimum wage were to be raised by £2 an hour, 500,000 extra people would be unemployed. If alcohol advertising was banned, the demand for alcohol would fall by 10%.
These are positive statements, and they imply and include no moral judgment of good or bad, right or wrong. It's important to distinguish between normative and positive statements. Over time, evidence becomes available to prove or disprove positive statements. Normative statements can't be disproved in this way. So be clear in an argument to distinguish the kind of statement being made. Otherwise, you may be arguing about and discussing different things.
It's so important to define our terms carefully. Let's take an example. Is it just to redistribute income from rich to poor? To some, the answer is yes, because justice means that people get an income which reflects their needs. The large family requires more than the small one.
To others, It's just that people receive an income that reflects what they've earned. The size of the family is irrelevant.
Being clear about what we mean by justice is clearly crucial to the argument. So whether we're talking about social justice or indeed anything else, defining our terms is going to be crucial. Ceteris paribus means all other things remaining equal. Consider this as a statement. In one year, car prices rose and people bought more cars. Conclusion, when you put the price of a car up, people buy more of them. Now, what's wrong with that statement? Well, actually, during that year, not only did car prices rise, but interest rates fell, petrol prices fell, and incomes rose. That's why people bought more cars. We can only conclude that people buy more cars when price rises if all other things remain equal. It's a common mistake for people to draw conclusions from evidence without making a ceteris paribus assumption. The human body is made up of cells. Cells are invisible to the naked eye. Therefore, you can't see me. This bit of nonsense illustrates what we call the fallacy of composition. What is true at the individual micro level isn't necessarily going to be true at the macro, the aggregate level. The illustration makes the point, but it's very easy to be misled.
So someone decides not to buy more clothes and shoes. She saves more, keeps her money in the bank, and this means that firms can borrow it, use it to invest, and so society produces more output. So, if we all save more, society will be much better off, right? But it may not work like that. What may be true for an individual may not be true for a society as a whole. If we all save more and spend less, total demand in society falls, so firms produce less, laying off workers. Society will then be worse off. This paradox of thrift, as it's called, illustrates the fallacy of composition. Don't assume that what's true for an individual is true in the aggregate.
So arguing your case, or listening to others make a case, is trickier than you might have thought. In the next film, we'll think about some other things that make this even more tricky.
Refer back to what we said about the ad populum idea. Isn't it true that if 95% of people have said that a product is very good, the next person to be asked is also highly likely to think that? Most voters think that the speed limit on motorways should be higher. Does that make it a good idea? If you don't think it does that mean that you think that democracy is a bad idea? Taxes on tobacco should be removed. You can't fairly argue that smoking tobacco is harmful. My grandfather smoked 60 cigarettes a day and lived to be 96. Analyse that argument. In Finland, the fines are determined partly by the income of the person committing the offence. The rich can pay a huge fine for a small violation of the law. Is that just? A scientist had a horseshoe over his door. When asked if he believed in that kind of thing, he said no. So why do you keep it there, he was asked. Ah, came the scientist's reply. It works, whether you believe in it or not. Comment. Which of the following statements are normative and which positive? A. Tighter safety laws reduce workplace accidents. B. Advertising should be stopped to prevent the gullible being exploited by large firms. C. The rich should be taxed more heavily than the poor. D. Accountants are more boring than sociologists.